So this video is going to be concentrating on the desktop and the subtop. There's actually going to be two pieces, but I'm starting off with the desktop itself. Now, early on at the very beginning of this project, I identified my absolute best pieces of lumber that I had in this batch, the ones with the straightest grain, with the best color, and I set them aside. And they've been sitting just waiting for me to be able to use them here. I wanted the best pieces though on the desktop where it's going to be most visible. I'm finally getting to mill them up and get them cut to size and going to get them glued up into a panel, and you can see here just how great that grain is. Now I'm using biscuits just to keep everything aligned during the glue up. It doesn't really add any strength, but it does really help when it comes to the alignment. I find that a combination of biscuits and these panel clamps that you see here in blue on the outside really help make a nice flat panel. Once the panel is glued up and comes out of the clamps, I'll take it over to my workbench and trim up both ends with a circular saw with this track attachment on it. So one of the things I'm doing differently on this desk is how I'm handling this top. Normally on a top you would have an overhang of some length or some size around the rest of the assembly. And I'm doing that on this one, but I'm doing it with a subtop. The top itself, I'm actually building to be basically the exact size and shape as the upper cabinet. And that's not a normal thing. It's a design decision. It's you could say a weird one. It's a different one. It's something that I just want to try. I had it in my head and I want to try it out. So what I'm doing here may seem a little bit weird, cutting this to the exact size and shape of the rest of this desktop assembly, but once I get that subtop on, I'm hoping it's really going to look good. We'll see. This is a gamble. This is an experiment. I have an idea in my head and I just want to try it, so we'll see how it turns out. I left the desktop oversized in the front so that I could set it on top of the upper case and trace out that front curve. Once I've got that traced, I take it over to the bandsaw and I make sure to cut just a little bit wide of my mark so that I can clean it up later with a router. So I'm using a router with a pattern bit to clean up the desktop, but as you can see with the desk moving like that, I completely forgot to even think about the fact that this desk was on wheels. So I scrambled a little bit to try and hold it in place, and ultimately everything ended up fine. I just kind of held the furniture dolly with my feet. I also ran the desktop through the drum sander a couple passes on either side just to clean all the glue marks up. Alright, let's talk about edge treatments for a second. This is the front of the desktop, but I'm also going to have a subtop on it that kind of steps down here and comes out. I'm thinking about another 1.5 inches, and we'll have that kind of same curve. And because this is the front of the desktop, you can imagine sitting here with your arms on this quite a bit, depending on what you're doing, if there happens to be a keyboard up here, or say you're just writing or whatever. So this is a spot that comfort is really going to be an issue. So I'm going to try and put a profile on the front of this that is really meant for resting your arms on it and being comfortable. And that means it's going to kind of come out wide, but be soft as well, you know, rounded a little bit, nothing too angular. So what I've done is I've marked out how far in I want that to come and how far down on the front. And it's going to come pretty far down the front because there's going to be that subtop, that second step that kind of comes out. So I want it to end up coming in kind of close to that. And I'm gonna dish this out pretty good, and it will make sense once I, match a profile on the subtop. But in order to do that, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to come through with a router and just kind of remove as much of that waste as I can with a 45-degree chamfer bit, and just kind of take that down and get just as much of the corner off as I can. And then I'm going to come back with hand tools and really shape this out. So this should be interesting. I did the majority of the shaping with a spoke shave, and it worked out great for this. Now it is a little bit hard to tell in the video here, but there is a change in what that shape looks like over the course of that desktop. Out towards the edges, it ends up more of a roundover, whereas in the center, it's really dished out more and that curve comes back further. I think this gave the best comfort, but also allowed for the best transition into what will be just a regular roundover around the rest of the desktop. So what I'm doing here is cutting the hole for the access port to the cable channel, and I'm also going to be making a cap that goes over this, but the first thing is to cut this hole out. And what I have is a routing template here, and my router, as you can see, has a bushing on it and a 1/4 inch bit. There's 3/16 offset here between the edge of the blade and the outside of the bushing, and I've got that accounted for. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this router bit to cut this hole. I have a piece of scrap mounted underneath of it, and I do have some double-sided tape, so once I do cut all the way through this center, it won't go flying on me or anything like that, so it will be secured. But basically I'm going to use this to cut my hole, and then I'm going to have to come back and also cut a rabbet around it for that cap to sit on. With the hole cut, I moved on to routing out the rabbet around that pass-through hole. However, I make sure I'm not very aggressive when I do that. I use a rabbeting bit that has interchangeable bearings and step down the bearings slowly, so I'm only taking a little bit at a time. I find that Walnut tends to splinter very easily if you're too aggressive with a rabbeting bit. The underside of the pass-through also received a very slight roundover, just enough really to keep that sharp edge down so that it's not rubbing on any cables or hands as they're reaching through. Once I had that done, I could start the sanding process and get the initial sanding at least done on the desktop. And with the pass-through hole cut, I could move on and concentrate on the cover. I have a piece of walnut that was a cutoff from the same material that I used to make the desktop, so it's got a perfect color match, and the grain when I found this piece pretty much perfectly matched where I cut the hole out. So it's not exact, but it's pretty close. So I milled it down as close as I could get it to the correct thickness, covered the hole with some painter's tape so that I could basically trace out the shape of it, and then applied that tape onto the piece that I just cut. This allowed me essentially to get a perfect tracing of the hole and transfer that over directly onto the pass-through cover. Finally, I sent it through the drum sander a couple times just to get it down to the absolute perfect fit. Both the cover and the pass-through will receive a couple rare earth magnets. This isn't necessarily something that has to be there, but I do like the fact that there's more of a solid connection between that cover and the desktop when it's placed in. The only thing to be careful of is just to make sure that both magnets on the lid and both magnets in the desktop have the same polarity facing the same direction. So the lid both has north facing down and the desktop has south facing up, or vice versa, just so that that lid can be turned either way. So I ended up finding this beautiful spalted maple, which is exactly what I was looking for. So I've got these milled up and ready to go, and I've decided what I'm doing here for the subtop for the joinery is loose tenons, and what I'm going to do is 2 essentially at each joint. So I'm going to lay those out and get these cut. I'm using my shop-made horizontal mortiser to make all of these mortises. However,
This can be done in several other ways. Of course, you can do more traditional mortise and tenons, or use a domino or dowels. Any of that would work. I just happen to have this tool and I love using it.
So for the curve on the front of the subtop, I want that curve to follow the curve of the desktop, but 1.5 inches out. So what I'm doing, I can't just trace the curve that's there, it won't be correct. So what I'm gonna do is trace it out with that 1.5 inch gap in it. And I'm just gonna follow the front of this desk as parallel as I can as I do this. Now, of course, the subtop is also 1.5 inches longer on either side, 3 inches longer total. So tracing it won't give me the whole curve. I still have to extend that out to the edge.
After the curve is roughed out, it gets cleaned up just in the same way that the desktop did, with a spoke shave and with a flexible sanding strip. Once I'm happy with how that front edge is looking, I'll dry fit everything again back at the desk so that I can trace out the curve of the desktop. The subtop, the front piece, has to be shaped much in the way that the desktop did. However, instead of going back a set distance from the front, I want to come back pretty close to where that desktop sits on it to make that curve and that shaping transition nicely.
So the dry fit looks pretty good at this point, and I'm pretty happy with how the front of this feels and how comfortable it is. So I'm at a point where I think I can go ahead and glue up this subtop frame and get it together, get it sanded down, and get the rest of the edge treatments on it. Basically, I'm going to put a round over all the way around it, top and bottom, and then once I have that done, I'll put it back in place and decide if I want to clean anything up further. I did go back and take a little bit more off the front of the top here, and I may continue doing that, but I want to have this in place and how it's finally going to be with all its edge treatments before I make that decision. Before I glue this up, I just wanted to kind of point out one thing, and that's this. This is the cutoff from when I cut the curve into this front piece here. I saved it. I could have cut this curve in after doing this glue up here. The problem with that is that I would have had this big bulky frame. It's not heavy, it's just big and bulky that I would have had to do all the, work at the bandsaw with and then shaping it and all that. So it was a lot easier to work with just this front piece, but that means I don't have a clean surface or a flat surface here for the glue up. So just by saving this, I can just plop it back down there. It's not a perfect match anymore because I've done some shaping, but it's close enough. And that gives me a good square clamping surface that now I can glue this up with.
Because of the subtop and because of the fact that the majority of the desk is made from solid wood and it's going to have a lot of movement over the seasons, this will probably be the most complicated desktop attaching method I think I've undertaken. So the subtop itself will be screwed down in the front and the back. However, the holes in the back need to be elongated to allow the case to contract and expand over the seasons. And then I'll also use tabletop fasteners with slots cut with a biscuit joiner to attach on the sides. Then the top itself has to get attached to the subtop, and that's going to be done 100% with the tabletop clips.
So one of the downsides of anything that's spalted, in this case spalted maple, is the spalting is the result of a rotting process. And so I've got a lot of punky spots in this wood. So I'm going to be treating this with a penetrating epoxy. So I'm going to mix it up and then thin it down a little bit and then brush it on, let it penetrate in as much as I can. I don't want to leave a lot on the surface, but I do want to get it into some of these really soft spots. This will harden it up and get rid of those spots. The look of the spalting will stay exactly the same. And then after it cures, I'll go back and do the final sanding on everything. According to the instructions, you can go 50% with the thinner. I'm going a lot less than that. You can go half and half, but I'm doing 2 to 1 to 1. Just want to thin it out a little bit. I had to stop myself and put on safety glasses there for a minute. I've actually had an accident where I got epoxy hardener in my eye and they had to scrape a layer of my cornea off. And I got really lucky. I had a great doctor and everything turned out fine and I got my vision back 100%. But, you know, with me using a brush to put this on, chances of splashing. I should have been wearing these when I first started this, when I started mixing it. And there we have it. I am really happy with how this looks. I was worried, I'll be honest. This was a gamble, doing this sub top and putting more spalted maple around the ring. It looked good in the drawing, but I really wasn't sure it was gonna come out good. So now that I see it in person and I step back and I look at it, particularly along the front where it's thinned out so much, I really love it. I'm beyond thrilled that it came out good. So anyway, thanks so much for watching, and thanks if you've been watching since the first video. I think this is going to be video 8. Thank you so much. I hope you're getting something out of it. As a reminder, this whole project is available with plans over on simplecove.com in the guild section. And of course, there'll be links to that in the YouTube description. But either way, I think I've got one more video after this. I've got to make the drawers and then get this sanded down and the finish applied. So this may turn out to be 2 videos, I don't know. I'll see when I get into it, but I'm getting towards the end of this and it actually looks like a desk. Stay tuned. Hopefully you'll come back and watch the next ones, and thank you so much for being here.